Legend of Total War here, and today we're doing another top 5 Total War video. This time covering the top 5 worst cities in a Total War game. So these are the cities that provide absolutely no value to the player when occupied. Whether they're completely impossible to defend, have no financial value, or just have huge amounts of unrest problems, these settlements should be avoided when thinking about conquest. With that being said, let's move in now to number 5. Coming in at number 5 is Gibraltar in Empire Total War. This is one of the smallest and poorest settlements in the game. It has absolutely no growth potential because no villages can be developed with population growth, and it has no starting town wealth, no tradable resources, and only 150 subsistence agriculture wealth, which is absolutely pitiful. So their starting owner, Spain, makes a whopping 40 gold from them per turn. So exempting them from taxation basically just makes no difference. Now, in terms of defending the settlement, it does have some strategic value in that holding onto the port here, you can sort of blockade the incomings and outgoings of the Mediterranean, but you can also do that from Madrid due to this port here. And I suppose you could, to some extent, do it from Tangier. So the only real value it does have, and the only reason it didn't go up higher on the list, is being able to raid this general area through the Mediterranean. That does have some strategic value. Now, holding on to this settlement can be quite difficult, unless you hold on to Tangier as well, because let's just say you're playing as Spain, and you're not likely to have good relationships with Morocco. They're of a different religion. Now, since this settlement doesn't make a whole lot of money, and it's not really worth putting in walls, it doesn't have a large garrison, at any time, Morocco could waltz in here and just take it, and then from here have a staging ground from which to march on Madrid. So, if you own Gibraltar, you really also need to hold Tangier, and Tangier can be very difficult for a European nation to hold. So, overall, Gibraltar, whilst it does have some strategic value, overall, you probably shouldn't prioritize capturing it as a non-Spain faction. Obviously, starting it off with Spain, don't sacrifice it right away, but you could sell it off at the beginning of the campaign and act as a little bit of a buffer with one of the other factions so that you don't have to deal with Morocco. That is an option for you. Anyway, let's now move on to number 4. Coming in at number 4 is Argentoratum in Total War Attila. So this one's a weird one in that I think it's actually bugged. It's the only minor settlement in the game that cannot have a 4th build slot. I don't know exactly why that is. It was never patched, it was never explained as to why, for some reason, this is just the smallest city in the game. There's no other city in the game that simply can't have a 4th build slot. It's the only minor settlement that has a maximum potential of 3 build slots. Every other city in the game, minor city that is, can have a 4th build slot. Even the ones that start off as ruins, given enough time, they can develop. Now, it missing out on that 4th build slot will massively impact on the city's value, because every province is a balancing act of public order, food, and sanitation. Every single province that you own needs to maintain food, or else it takes public order problems. And that requires you to build a food building. And every food building causes squalor and public order problems. And since you only have one other build slot, you can only really tackle one of those problems in that region, which means it relies heavily on the other provinces sorting out its own problems. So it's really poor in that regard. Now, there is another settlement in the game, Nova Traiana Bostra, that is missing a build slot, but it's a major settlement, so it's missing its 6th build slot. Again, it's not exactly explained as to why that is. It just cannot get that 6th build slot. Now, in addition to it missing that build slot, there's nothing particularly valuable about it. It doesn't have any tradable resources. It's not a strategically well-placed settlement. It's not blocking off any choke points. And as a Western Roman Empire starting province, it's pretty close to Uberzus, which is owned by a barbarian faction. I can't remember which one off the top of my head. And it's pretty much going to be one of the first settlements sacked or razed into oblivion. and so holding onto it throughout most of the campaign has absolutely no value, and that's why it's getting the 4th slot on this list. Let's now move on to number 3. Coming in at number 3 is Albion in Total War Warhammer 2, specifically the Mortal Empires campaign. Now, I don't think anyone's going to argue against the point that Norscan settlements are the least valuable settlements in the game. Nobody can build walls in Norscan settlements, not even the Norscans, who can't build walls in general. They have the smallest number of build slots in their provincial capitals. They have a very difficult time maintaining public order due to the chaos corruption for those factions that can't handle chaos corruption. They're inhospitable, they're poor, there's really nothing good about them. The only reason that any non-Norscan faction would try to own Norscan settlements is really just to try to eliminate Norska as a faction, because they can be a constant raiding pain in the ass. Demolishing their settlements is actually really difficult to root them out. It's really just a hit and run otherwise if you're going to do it that way. Now, at a glance, it might seem like Albion has 8 build slots, but when you get to tier 5, you realize that these 2 build slots here are just completely empty and you can't actually construct anything there. Now that brings them in line with other Norscan provincial capitals that only have 6 build slots. However, every other Norscan province in the game has at least one other region, a minor region in it. Now, Albion itself only has the one region in the province. Now, that means that even for Norska, public order will be more difficult to maintain because minor settlements are still able to provide a little bit of public order. Now, on lower difficulties, that might not seem to matter, but on legendary difficulty, public order really does matter with the Norskans, especially in the early stage of the campaign. And so taking an early game Albion is really difficult to maintain public order, even if you exempt it from taxation, because it just can't maintain itself. Once it gets to tier 5 and you've got Wulfric with his sword, then you can start to maintain it a little bit more and you can leave it alone. But it's not particularly valuable, and also it's usually the first settlement that gets invaded when a Dark Elf invasion force or even a High Elf invasion force comes time to knock out Norska, if you're playing as Norska. In addition to that, Albion is the only Norscan region that is completely covered in attrition which they can't handle, which is swamp attrition. Everywhere else in Norska is snow and chaos attrition, which they're immune to, but they're not immune to swamp attrition. So it's kind of inhospitable even for the Norskans, and that's why it's getting the 3rd spot. Now things might change when the patch comes out next week, which gives Albion another settlement, but we'll wait and see what happens then. Anyway, let's move on to number 2. Coming in at number 2 is Bulgur in Medieval 2 Total War. There are many reasons as to why this settlement here is the worst, but let's start at the bottom of the list and work our way up. Let's go with public order. It's probably one of the most difficult settlements in the game to maintain public order, simply due to distance to capital penalty. There is no reason, no matter what faction you play as, to have your capital anywhere near Bulgur. Generally speaking, you want to have your capital near the densest number of settlements in the game. So usually, around the coasts of Mediterranean, somewhere there. Now, even if you're playing as Russia, which has their capital at Novgorod, even the distance between Novgorod and Bulgur, which the Russians should be the first person to capture it, based on, just distance, it's still going to have a distance to capital penalty that'll be quite significant, even though there's only one settlement in between them. So, maintaining public order here isn't impossible, but it is difficult. Now, another reason is money. Most settlements, the reason that you own it is for money. Does Bulgur make any money at all? No, absolutely not, because it only has 3 trade partners that it can trade with: Moscow, Ryazan, and Sarkle. And the amount of resources out here is nothing. So the trade income is virtually zilch. Now, the third reason why this settlement is so shit is because it starts right next to a spawn point of the fucking Mongols. So if it was to add insult to injury, if the Mongols spawn here, it'll be one of the first settlements to get pounded into oblivion. And because it's so low value, having loads of troops garrisoning this settlement, because it's just no value at all, makes absolutely no sense. So that's why Bulgar's getting this spot on the list. Can't maintain public order, makes no money, and it's basically the first thing that the Mongols are going to fucking destroy as soon as they arrive. Now, the Mongols don't always show up here. There's about two or three spots where they can show up. They can show up here, here, or here. So it's basically a 1 in 3 chance if Bulgar's going to get obliterated at the rise of the Mongols when they show up in the game. Now that includes the Timurids as well, because I believe that their spawn points are exactly the same. So that's why Bulgar gets this spot on the list. Anyway, let's move on to number 1. Taking the number 1 spot for the worst settlement in a Total War game goes to Themis in Rome Total War. Now, Themis, the sort of mythical home of the Amazons, is a little bit of a Easter egg faction in this, or Easter egg settlement. Under normal circumstances, if you don't already know it's there, you're probably not going to find it in the campaign without turning off the fog of war. But let's just say you want to capture it. It's one of the most difficult settlements to capture from a rebel in the game. The garrison that's stationed there, the Amazons, are some of the strongest garrisons that you will ever counter by a non-regular faction. They have tier 9 experience, and they have some really good chariot units and archers. So sending a small force through here to capture the settlement is not going to cut it. You're going to have to bring at least, I don't know, a half stack of good troops commanded by a decent general. And the thing is as well, it takes quite a long time to get there, and these roads aren't developed at the start of the campaign, so you're probably looking at 3 to 5 turns just to get here. And if you get there and then fail, it's a huge disappointment, because then you have to walk all your men back, pick up some more troops, and then come back. You know, that's, again, if you fail. Now let's just assume that you managed to capture the settlement. Great. Can you hold it? Public order-wise, this settlement is very difficult to hold, because it has one of the highest amounts of base unrest in the game. This is unrest that you cannot get rid of by any means except by putting an excellent governor in there. And since this settlement doesn't have any actual monetary value, not really, why would you waste a governor to try to get that unrest down? So it's really difficult to have this settlement under your control autonomously. Now, there are a few other settlements that have that amount of unrest, such as Tarsus and Jerusalem, but they're close to the Mediterranean. They have a lot of value through their trade routes, and you can put your capital fairly close to it. But Themyscira, no, it doesn't make any sense to put your capital anywhere close to Themyscira. It's just not near any dense a number of settlements. There's no value doing that. And even though there is gold here, because unless you really want to put your capital here to hold it, it's going to get all eaten up by corruption. So it's difficult to hold, difficult to maintain public order, and it has virtually no monetary value. And it's just not really, it's not going to provide you with troops, because sending troops out this way, again, even with the roads here, it just takes a long time to get them out. It's just not worth it. There's just so much better places for it. So in every way, shape, and form, Themyscira is not really worth holding, except for one, just for painting the map your color. That's the only real benefit for capturing the settlement. Anyway, that's the end of this top 5 list. Let me know what you think, whether you agree with the list or whether you didn't agree, whether you think that there's some other cities that you think are even worse than the cities that I put on this list. Anyway, that's the end of this one, and I'll see you in the next one, fuckers.